All right, what's up, everybody? So I thought today I'd just talk a little bit about what I've been seeing happen in terms of the tech space, the role and influence of culture, and especially the influence of culture between East and West, and specifically, of course, US and China. There's obviously been a lot of updates and events that have really kind of shaken the Western US tech space. And I think this is also influenced by some of the broader energies that and influences that we see across various different cultures. And since we are seeing a lot of Chinese influence making its way into U.S. media now because of what's been happening, there was actually a really interesting video from a Buddhist monk who was talking a little bit about what to expect in 2025. Okay, and so before I go into what you see here on screen, let's actually dive into that video. So this is the video that I'm referring to, and I'm just going to put that on mute for now. But this particular Buddhist monk, she's talking about how in China's astrology, if you're not familiar with it, there are actually different systems of astrology. The ones I think that most people in the West refer to is considered Western astrology, and it's something that is quite pervasive, but also has been a little bit taken out of context due to what people have been used to with daily horoscopes, right? And daily horoscopes, especially if they're found in a lot of women's magazines in the past, or even just online, they don't really go into the depth of what astrology does know or does have in its systems. And I think when you start actually digging into more of the Eastern astrology systems, you'll see just how in-depth it actually is. And remember, if you are somebody who doesn't really believe in this stuff, that's fine. But if you start looking into all the different cultures, they all have their own systems and ways of looking at the world. And astrology is an interesting one because actually a lot of the great minds of the past, many of them were into astrology or the hidden mysteries, right? The secret mysteries. And I think things like science, technology, engineering, mathematics does actually get a lot more interesting when you start to couple it with more spiritual, sacred aspects. And so that's generally how I see all of this. And what I'm about to share with you is more just understanding the interconnectedness of cycles or seasons, if you want to call it, that are constantly happening all the time, whether you believe in it or not. It's just kind of like, the day and night, right? Whether you believe in day or night, like, it doesn't matter because it's going to exist, it's going to be there. But even in the quantum physics world, they are starting to prove that things like how our own local realities are always subjective and actually very rarely objective. And what that means is that a lot of the things that we perceive is potentially not even true at all, or not a holistic perspective or unbiased, objective perspective, that whatever we are viewing, it is subjective to our local reality, right? And so one of the things when looking at all these news events is really understanding that everybody's truth is just a different angle or perspective of the whole truth. And that I think as human beings, we are all working towards trying to come to a middle ground or an average where the truth possibly lies. So coming back to this particular video, you'll notice that it has been running while I've been talking, but she talks about the year of the fire snake, which in Chinese astrology is based on the 12 animals. So every year has essentially 12 different animals associated with it. And 2025 is the year of the fire snake, okay? So not only do you have the animals that are represented by the zodiac symbols, but you also have the 5 elements that are also cycling. So just because this year is a snake year, if, say, 12 years from now, somebody is also born on a snake year, they won't be a fire snake. They might actually be the next element in that sequence, right? So this is how they get nuanced information around people's personalities. And what I've come to understand about these astrological systems and why I find it so fascinating is because, again, based on the times in which they were developed, but also based on how pervasive they've been over time, there's something to pay attention to. Because again, whether you believe in it or not, they exist, and there's a reason why people still believe in such things. And from that standpoint is why I find it fascinating. So with the fire snake, the Chinese New Year, and I'm actually going to go to here. In China, they don't celebrate the New Year December 31st. Of course, that's more of a Western calendar system based off of the Gregorian calendar. But the Chinese New Year is based off of the lunar cycles as opposed to the solar. And Wednesday, January 29th is when the next Chinese New Year is going to be taking place. Now, what's interesting is that for me, I've actually always found the Chinese New Year to be more in sync with what I felt as a renewal for a new year. I've never really resonated with the Western New Year because often it's just mostly focused on, partying, have fun, etc. Of course, you can make whatever event that is kind of taking place in society your own, but the Chinese New Year, I think just energetically, I've always felt like it's had more meaning. So with that, I think what's been really fascinating is, when we were talking about, when I was showing you this particular tweet, I want to come back to it, and the influence of Chinese culture now on the rest of the world, it also kind of made me look back into the influences of all these different cultures, right? The interesting thing about culture, at least from my perspective, is that it is very fluid, right? I think we all acknowledge that it exists as a term, as a concept, but we're not always aware of how it is influencing us on a day-to-day basis because it can be something that feels very intangible and very hard to grasp or even measure. And so why I started looking at this is because I noticed that each culture has influences from every other culture. This is why I personally don't think that all cultures or any one culture is better than another because it's relative to what you're looking at and also what time period. So how I came to this was when I was looking into Chinese astrology, I was also thinking about, well, if we're looking at the Eastern side, are there elements from Chinese astrology or Chinese ways of seeing the world rooted in things from India? And I found out that yes, Indian influence on Chinese culture is usually seen through the prism of Buddhism, right? And I think what's fascinating is that not just China, but Japan, Korea, a bunch of other countries that had a Buddhist influence, a lot of that did come from India. And Buddhism itself, if you look at influences of Buddhism, Hinduism. So let's have a look at this. So other famous Hindu figures saw the Buddha as a great Hindu that greatly influenced Hinduism. Gandhi called the Buddha a Hindu of Hindus, right? So even Buddhism, there are apparently some roots in Hinduism. Now, if we actually look at Hinduism versus Zoroastrianism, take a look at this. If you've never heard of Zoroastrianism, you can see here, it is a religion with a god, a prophet, a holy book, and in long periods of history, a single hierarchical order of clergies. Hinduism, however, lacks all these features, right? So Zoroastrianism, I think, I found really fascinating because there's a strong connection with the element of fire. And this is related to this year, right, of the fire snake in Chinese astrology. So Zoroastrians have a particularly strong relationship with fire, which they see as a focus for ritual and contemplation. The sacred fire must be kept burning continually and has to be fed at least 5 times a day. So if you are not familiar with this fascinating story, but there is a fire, this is the fire temple, that has literally, it has a flame that has never been extinguished. And you can see here, 167 fire temples in the world, 45 in Mumbai, 105 in the rest of India. right? There you see that connection with the Indians again. Um, so first, evident in 9th century BCE. I think what I wanted to see is like, when was the first fire? Parthian Empire. But yes, essentially there, again, when you look at all of these cultures, there's always some sort of influence from another culture. And so in the West, there is often a belief that the West is best, right? But as somebody who looks at all of these cultures and tries to respect each of them, and the elements that they have within them for what they are and for what they represent to those local groups, even the West has a lot of roots in the East, right? A lot of Greek thought came from Egypt, and a lot of Egyptian thought came from, cultures before it. And all of these cultures are building on top of it. And so when we are seeing these sort of conflicts between East and West, US and China, I feel like they're kind of not unfounded, but short-sighted. And I think it's very important to still celebrate whatever culture you have and that has been formed through your own roots, but to also look at what is starting to come in from other cultures. And you can see we have hit an inflection point whereby in the US, specifically, let's take a look at this. Specifically with DeepSeek coming in, if you aren't familiar with the news, but essentially you can see here the way that people in the West are now starting to talk about Chinese innovation is super interesting, because I think a lot of folks don't realize that China has been quite ahead for a while now, but it's only been due to certain events in the US that have pushed people to now start to discover just how far advanced the Chinese are. And I'm kind of here for it, right? Because I think it's important for us to learn from one another, learn from different cultures, because we all have something to bring to the table. Now, I think the ironic part, too, is that even in the West, right, in the tech world, we have to be honest with ourselves. Even if you have people who were born in the United States or have gotten their U.S. citizenships, a lot of folks in tech are from the East. Indians, Chinese, right, like very Asian-dominated. And I think this has a lot to do with the culture, or Asian cultures in general, from India to China to Japan, Korea, etc., where one, they're communal, they're collectivists, you could argue, and they put high value on education, family reputation, those sort of things, right? And I think the US is getting quite a shock, because the narrative that they've been fed for a long time is that individualism is the way, capitalism is the way, and I think they're getting shocked that there are other systems and other ways of operating in the world that might be proving better, right? And so this is not to say, again, that one is better than the other, but it is to highlight the power of seasons and cycles, which are actually really well defined and explained in things like Chinese astrology, Vedic astrology, or Indian astrology, even Western astrology. I think there's also Hellenistic astrology, right, that is present. These systems, you don't have to believe in them fully, but investigate them and understand why they persist for centuries, right? Because you just might find a grain of truth there that might help you in navigating these turbulent times. And they are turbulent, right? So, again, I look at these things as just a way to be able to better understand our world and better navigate the chaos. Because in times like this, people will often snap back to traditional ways of knowing because it provides a sense of security. For me, it's just more of a sense of curiosity, right, as opposed to security. And again, it's looking at all of these different cultures to see what can we learn from all of them to help make us better human beings. And so this particular video, I think what I found the most fascinating is, so this lady talks about how, based on the Buddhist and even Chinese astrological influences, that in the year of the fire snake, there is essentially an element of fire that is influencing everybody. And this can be seen as both a metaphorical thing, but also a literal thing. And how this translates or plays out is that we will experience a lot of fire characteristics, both physically in our planet and also within ourselves. So here you can say, be aware of the influence of the external environment and focus on internal cultivation. So essentially, she's saying that like because of the fire element of this year, we can expect more chaotic energy, or more fiery energy, which can either translate into an intensity of passion and desire, or it can translate into sort of unbridled desires that leads to things like robberies, illegal activities, or even in the case of our planet Earth, this would be like earthquakes or even volcanic eruptions. It might even result in seeing more solar flares from our sun, right? Generally, human beings, we are creatures of pattern making. So you could argue, right, if you don't believe in this sort of stuff, that this is just sort of a form of pattern recognition. Yes, human beings are wired to form patterns and connections. But I think a lot of people do themselves a disservice when they ignore those patterns and connections too. Because we are constantly looking for meaning, and we are constantly looking for ways to understand our world. And I don't think it's necessarily wrong to believe in something that might not be true for other people, right? But it may be wrong, of course, if it leads to you doing something that harms others, right? So again, looking at these systems, there are all different ways for different cultures to interpret the world. So with this, what we can learn from it is that we can just think simply that if there's a broader fire energy for the year, and we're looking at the lunar year in the Chinese calendar, then whenever you experience these sort of things sort of play out in your world, it's important for you to, one, acknowledge it, but then two, go inside and calm yourself or calm that fire. Because that fire energy is going to be present there regardless of what you do, okay? And so it just helps you to be more aware, again, so you can handle the chaos. So if you are seeing things that, it's like, my God, the world is turning to shit, you can look at it that way, or you can just be like, these are natural cycles that exist, and I will do what I can to reduce the effects of that. So let's see if we can find a little bit more. Okay, so I think this is a good one. Let me go back. Okay. The year of fire triggers human desires, and 2025 is also the year of the snake, hatred. So it talks about how, because of the fire energy, our human desires and wants might come out even more intensely, which may lead to unexpected behaviors. So I think the Buddhist monk, she talks about how, for some people, if they were typically rule followers, they may find themselves breaking rules to deal with these sort of hidden desires that are starting to come out, which is a result, again, of this fire energy. And it also means that in relationships, people might find that there is an external third party or something involved, or there might be a desire for a new house or a new home. And she said there's nothing wrong with these things, but again, it's about being aware and doing something about it with that awareness so that you can calm or tame that excess fire energy that may be coming in. Now, again, I'm not going to go into like the entire astrological system, or especially the Chinese one. But again, I'm sharing this so that you can be more aware of what is playing out. Okay? So, with that, Guanyin. So this is this particular, I think they call her a Bodhisattva. Essentially, kind of like a female Buddha or deity. And it's really interesting because when this Buddhist monk was talking about her, Guanyin is actually one of my favorite characters. And I remember coming across her many, many years ago. But if you look into her, she's really all about like compassion. And so during this time, the Buddhist monk talks about how when the fire element is sort of raging, it's important to cultivate compassion and also a sense of gratitude or gratefulness for what you have. Because as everything seems to be burning around us, right? If we look at the LA fires, a great start to the year. With that comes also, after the scorch, it also allows a reset of things to be able to grow anew. And so you can also embrace that element here. And a way to deal with it all, despite the chaos, despite the fire and the burning around, is to keep yourself calm, to practice compassion and gratitude. And I think the monk also talks about that famous mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. So you might not have heard of this before, but it's a famous mantra where, according to the Buddhist monk, during this time, whenever you're experiencing this sort of chaos during this year, is to repeat Om Mani Padme Hum over and over again as a way to cultivate that compassion and also that gratitude. And you can see here, Om Mani Padme Hum is the 6-syllable Sanskrit mantra. And again, right, even though the Buddhist monk, she might be Chinese, right, Om Mani Padme Hum is Sanskrit. Sanskrit is from the region of India. So there's a lot of connections between India and China, and on a world stage or a world platform, this is why I think we're also seeing the rise of India and China as competitive superpowers to the US and the rest of the West. And again, this is part of the cycles where the pendulum kind of keeps swinging back and forth. And in order to deal with that pendulum swinging back and forth, you have to kind of go within and keep your center. This is extremely important for entrepreneurs, for business leaders, etc., because we're dealing with chaos all the time. And this is why these sort of systems have always fascinated me, because it's a way of being able to deal with the chaos, right? And if you're in environments that are chaotic all the time, then you have to be able to cultivate this sort of inner tranquility, right, amidst it all. So yeah, this is the Chinese New Year. We've talked about Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, Hinduism, the connections between all the different cultures, and how at the end of the day, we really just need to be appreciative and grateful for all of the different cultural influences that we all have influences from, right? So I'm going to go back to that original tweet to end this. So this particular video, and I'm going to play it, see. Now, I believe, judging from this video, it looks like it's from Xiaohongshu, which is the new social media app that TikTokers were flocking to, if you didn't hear about this. And so Taylor Sheridan's cultural takeover is complete. A dude in China has become a hugely popular social influencer after recreating the Yellowstone Ranch in Inner Mongolia. Okay, so Yellowstone. So cultural context from the West. Yellowstone is a TV series, if you haven't heard about it, okay? Taylor Sheridan, I think Sheridan right here, Sheridan has 3 of top 10 streaming shows right now. Landman, Tulsa King, Lioness. Dude is a machine. I previously wrote about this journey. So this is from Trung Fan. Love this guy. If we're talking about culture in the West, Trung is very much on it. And so the influence of American culture, right, you can see has made its way into the East as well, right? People, despite what focus there may be right now on China, right, and their dominance from tech and innovation standpoint, we cannot forget that the U.S. has had a major influence on every other part of the world to date. And, that has to be acknowledged, right? But times change, seasons change, and it's very important to be aware of this. But this particular event, I think, is super fascinating because I remember seeing this guy on Xiaohongshu, and it was super fascinating to me to see how essentially a U.S.-style ranch was recreated in Mongolia, right? And for those of you who aren't familiar with where Mongolia is in the world, it's just above China, okay? And yeah, it's just super cool to see. See? He's Mongolian, but he loves cowboy culture. I mean, and if you look at the history of Mongolia, they're big on their horses, right? Genghis Khan, the Golden Hordes, right? There's a lot of history there. And again, this is all to say that we can learn about other cultures, respect them, appreciate them, and then see what works for our own. Because again, culture is not necessarily fixed. It's constantly changing, shifting, fluid, just like water. So yeah, there you have it. That's sort of my rant, my review of recent events, and talking about just how this lines up or aligns with what's happening on a sort of more broader energetic scale, as mentioned with the Year of the Fire Snake from China's astrology. Okay, so if you found this interesting, feel free to share your comments below. If there's anything that I got wrong in my information, I would love to hear as well. This is very much about dialogue and learning from one another. As somebody who is of mixed race, I'm always looking at these different cultures, right, and finding connections between them. But I'm always looking to hear more from deeper experts because, again, it just makes my understanding better too. So if you know anything else about the Year of the Fire Snake, or if you know anything even about just from the Buddhist side, or even about this mantra, right, Om Mani Padme Hum, then please let me know. And with that, hope you enjoyed, and we'll speak soon.